availabilities and so on, we didn't meet very often, and when we did, it was quite short meetings, but very, very stimulating. Another difference is that we didn't have an artist. I'm from Opera North, but I'm not a performer, I'm not a writer, I'm a producer. So one of the things that I do, because I'm quite involved with Les and the Dare thing, one of the things that I do is wrestle quite a lot with kind of ethical and philosophical ideas about what's the point of the arts, what are they there for, why bother? And I wrestle with that kind of quite seriously because the organisation I represent receives quite a lot of public funding. So I'm thinking about this quite a lot, and then John, in particular, from Biological Sciences at the university, and I, we met in order really to talk about what is the nature and the point of creativity anyway. So what we're going to do, so we met, and then meanwhile, we also had some conversations going on with Jim and Beatrice from the university. Jim's also in Biological Sciences. Beatrice, rather uniquely, is a PhD student who's shared between music and biological sciences. That's right, isn't it? That is right. And so we thought we would just have, what we did was we had conversations about creativity and where we all came from in relation to that. And in order to prepare for today, what we've done is kind of restructured those conversations. So we're going to relive for you a kind of in microcosm the conversations we've been having about creativity. There's no show at the end of it. This is the show. The medium is the message. All right, so I'm just going to start with a little preamble, which is to say that a lot of people within society would make what I think by being here we all think would be a kind of false separation between the kind of so-called logical disciplines of science, mathematics, and so on, and the so-called creative practices of art and performance. But again, because we're here, I think we probably all suspect and believe that science is necessarily, or at least good science is necessarily creative, that it requires innovation, risk-taking, pushing the boundaries a bit. And in the same way, I think that creativity and the artistic process requires constraint and discipline, whether that's a deadline to get something made by, or it's a budget that you've got to make something within, or it's a venue that you've got to make something for. And for a lot of artists, there are exceptions like Van Gogh or whatever, but for a lot of artists, if you say to them, just go and make something, they would say, well, when by? And even the poem that we wrote earlier together, we needed to know that we had to come up with 2 words each, and then it could be structured into something creative. So I think what we're going to think about is creativity, and what we've done is we've all brought with us one example of something that we think is creative. So Beatrice, perhaps you'd like to start with your example of creativity.
Yeah, so my auntie handmade a handbag for my birthday, and I thought that this was creative because just coming up with the idea of making the handbag was creative. She could have just given me chocolates or smellies for my birthday, which would have been fine, but instead she decided to make a bag. And although she followed a pattern, there were lots of different patterns that she could have chosen from, which illustrates that she was creative. And she also chose the materials, which colour, the length of the straps, which that signifies to me that she has had the freedom of choice to choose what she wants to do with the pattern, which illustrates that she was creative. And it's interesting because she wouldn't have done that previously, which suggests that over the years she's boosted her creativity.
Was there a turning point? Was there a tipping point where she went from non-creative to creative?
Well, she's having chemotherapy at the minute, so I think that's probably, she thought, well, I've got to keep myself busy, I want to do something, so I'll make this bag. So I think that's an interesting point.
Jim, do you want to?
As examples of creativity, I immediately thought of two neuroscientists, maybe the fathers or godfathers of neuroscience. I'm a neuroscientist. And Camillo Golgi here came up with a way of staining brains so that we can identify the different cells in it. And before that, it was difficult to see the cells in their entirety. So in fact, nobody really had a good idea of how a brain was organised and structured. And so Golgi came up with this silver impregnation. Only some cells would, in their entirety, get labelled. And the beauty of it is, in fact, he looked down the microscope, he had no cameras, he didn't have any way of projecting the image, and he just drew by hand what he saw. Now, and I guess maybe what his product was actually anti-creative, because he drew what he saw, and he denied any of too much interpretation of him in it. Although his idea of how the brain worked was that everything was, all the cells, despite in different shapes and sizes, they were all connected together in a reticulum. He was wrong. His pupil, Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who took up his method, came up with a different, so they drew different kinds of cells. And you see, they're quite artistic, I think. They're quite beautiful, the different cells. And each part of the brain has cells that look different. And that somehow reflects a little bit of the different function. And so Cajal, he copied the methods, drew his own cells, and he had a different theory. Each cell was exactly that, a cell. It was individual. It wasn't a reticulum, but they did communicate with other cells.
Well, when you said he looked down the microscope, that he denied that he was creative, is now that you do have photographs of these cells, are they?
No, they're accurate. Yeah.
They're accurate.
Yeah.
Are they spot on, or can you see the interpretive artist?
No, I think they're spot on.
They're spot on.
Actually.
Right, interesting.
They're spot on. As
they're incredibly beautiful.
So the cell on the right is one from the cerebellum. That's a big part of the brain. It looks a bit like a cauliflower at the back of the brain. And the cell on the left is from your cortex, so just underneath your skull. And you can see they're quite different looking, yet they managed to recreate them and come up with all these different cell types. And this kind of research, actually, we haven't solved this. This is still ongoing. You might have heard of the Human Brain Project. The EU, the US are pumping billions into this to try and wire up our nervous system so we can understand how it works. And I guess our discussion in this kind of work led me to bang on about one of my favourite ideas that these guys listened to. Was I'd love to get a sculptor and make a big 30-foot high sculpture of these neurons. And then I've obviously spent too many glasses of wine thinking about this. Because if you turn the UK on its side and stretch it out and compress it a bit, it's almost brain-shaped. So the north of Scotland is the front of the brain, and Cornwall is the brain stem. Which makes Norwich the cerebellum. And conveniently it puts Leeds right at the centre of the brain. And then my idea is that we would have a big neuron representing those parts of the brain, because the neurons would be different in every major town across the UK. And then if you could extrapolate it, we could have them talking to each other by Wi-Fi. And then we could just see what networks emerge across the UK. So if anybody happens to know a rich sculptor who's keen to start it off, sculptor, then I'll be happy to meet them.
But like your pioneers, you want these. You don't want these interpreted by a sculptor.
Well, that's up for discussion, I suppose. But I have to.
But they're beautiful anyway. So
yeah. I did email someone yesterday. Let's see if they get back to us.
John.
So, being a scientist myself, and having this kind of ongoing thing in my life in terms of, you know, am I creative? And when you said there's a difference between artists and scientists, I've always kind of wondered about that. And so I wanted to choose someone who everybody knows as a scientist, but completely changed the world in the science that they did, but in an extremely creative way. So my example of creativity is Albert Einstein, who, from the scientific point of view, realised that Newtonian mechanics, this is the only science I'm going to say, so take it or leave it, no longer was sufficient to explain or reconciles the law of classical mechanics in the context of what had been found out about electromagnetism. And so what that means is that he realised that what was out there didn't explain reality. And so using his creativity and obviously work from other scientists, but you know, making a huge step change, came up with theoretical basis for how we understand such concepts as the scientific understanding of light and gravity and electromagnetism. The thing that really appeals to me about Einstein, obviously taking on that complete leap in faith and creative mind, is that he did it in an extremely unconventional way. At the age of 12, he had taught himself geometry, which may have some links into the creative, the example of creativity that Dominic's going to choose. So at a very young age, he'd clearly got a different mind to other kids and decided to do this on his own. He didn't want a teacher. At the age of 16, he left school because the discipline appalled him, and he didn't want to be any part of that. However, he was able to then return. He failed to get into the best university in his adopted country, Switzerland, but managed to nonetheless become educated largely through his own work and through informal education methods, talking to colleagues and friends, and develop this amazing creative brain, which clearly is we all know as probably Einstein. Whenever we say the word genius, he's probably one of two or three names that come to mind. But he did it in a very unconventional way, never having gone through a sort of standard university academic background. And in my mind, that blurs the boundaries between the kind of, you know, you become a scientist, you go to university, you get your degree, and you do that, follow that route. Yeah. He clearly didn't, and I think that shows that you don't have to be conventional.
In fact, would you even say that you have not to be conventional?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you know, when you look at the geniuses, if that's the right word, you know, that we're familiar with, how many of those have been, you know, done the right things, gone to the right schools, gone to the right universities, and followed a path that's trodden by non-geniuses? I would argue that perhaps doing things in an unconventional way might be the better way to develop those who are, you know, potentially the geniuses of the future.
The example that I brought, as you know, is very similar. Not entirely self-taught, but yeah, we'll have a little bit of Mozart. Well, it's not Mozart. This is Allegri, which is good. Just hear a little bit of it. Gregorio Allegri written in about 1630. The Miserere. We'll just leave it on that volume. The reason I chose this is Allegri's not the creative person for me. The person that's creative is Mozart. What happened with this piece of music by Allegri is it was played in the Sistine Chapel for Vespers every Easter, and it was forbidden on pain of excommunication for anyone to transcribe it. So the only place you could hear it was by going and devoting yourself to the music in situ. And Mozart went there with his dad when he was 14, and then went back to the room where he was staying and wrote it out, just from memory of having seen it. He went back in again on the Friday, made some changes, and then gave it to somebody, and before you knew it was published. I think that's probably enough. It's an incredibly complex piece of music that he did at that age. But when we brought this up, you found that an interesting choice. Maybe you want to talk about that?
Well, so the conversation with respect to creativity and the definition of creativity, then sort of move towards the idea of mental health, which sounds kind of a big leap. But when you think of that ability to go and listen to a piece of music with the complexity that the Allegro has, you know, that takes a certain mind which has an ability to precisely remember detail. And the question would be then is, you know, does that kind of, in the way that we think about mental health, does that put this person on a certain scale in terms of where we see their mental abilities and to a certain extent illness? So when you then look at people such as Mozart and certainly Einstein could be put into this category, there are certain schools of thought that suggest that they suffer from mental states such as Asperger's syndrome, which Einstein has variously been suggested to have had as well. And this ability to think in a way which is very clearly not the way that I suppose, well, maybe I shouldn't say very clearly, but certainly is on an extreme of the kind of thinking that perhaps most of the people in this room do, suggests that perhaps genius is based on a completely different wiring or a largely different wiring of the brain, and a way in which, you know, the neurons that Jim talked about are in place such that you know, the capability is in our way of thinking defined as some kind of abnormality. And so the question then becomes is, you know, should we be, rather than looking at people who exhibit signs of abnormality and looking at them in some kind of perhaps negative way, or in a way where we assume that they can't do things that or achieve things that you know, the rest of us aspire to, that actually they should be the ones who are considered in a much higher level, and the appreciation of what can be achieved with this ability to think in a different way, and can be inspiring to us as you know, the likes of Mozart and Einstein. And in fact, you know, looking deeper into this, it turns out that, and again, you know, you can there's argument about this, but artists such as Andy Warhol, Michelangelo, politicians such as Thomas Jefferson, all had features of on the Asperger's autism scale. And so the question then becomes, you know, rather than seeing that as some kind of affliction, should we be looking at something?
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate within medical thing and parents of children who've got autistic children or Asperger's children about, you know, do you look for a cure or do you embrace the thing itself? And you know, and that's really interesting thing. You guys came to me with an idea to do an experiment in whether you can control creativity in a way, didn't you? And do you want to just talk a bit about what that is, and then Jim, you could tell us about your thing.
So we were interested in looking at how changes in the speed of music impact subjective emotion and physiological responses. And that, because listening to music can result in mental visualizations, changes in mood, listening to music is a creative process, and that may help people become more creative, and also may help people it may help contribute to geniuses developing their ideas and doing what they do. So the study itself is a creative process, and it may be able to boost listeners' creativity.
The thing, I know you just kind of bring it, but the thing that was on my mind, which I said in the email this week, the kind of worrying thing I find about that is that if you can boost creativity, does that mean you can also control and limit creativity? So could you, for example, if creativity is in some way aligned to non-conformity, could you use the same tools to restrict it? Anyway.
Well, I don't know, but it did make me think about could we control creativity? And I guess those of you who grew up in the 60s might know your own ways of controlling creativity, but maybe that's not so acceptable. And this is something that might translate into Beatrice's research, although she doesn't know it yet. This is the first she's hearing about it. And there's a recent few publications on ways of controlling creativity, and on the left there's a model of an experiment called transcranial direct current stimulation. And in fact, the US Army is using this to see can it increase learning for pilots so it can get them into fighter planes faster because their training takes a long time. And in this experiment, it's effectively you just put big electrodes on the head and pass a very small current through these electrodes. It's so small it's hard to believe it's actually doing something, and that is even a subject to debate in the literature. But the other two panels are representations of where these authors think that current is influencing the brain. And you can see it's just at the very front, so they call it frontal polar part of the brain. And what they asked is, well, does this influence creativity? And then the next one, we see the measures that they use to say, yes, doing this for 20 minutes can boost your creativity. And on the left, what was the left one? Oh yeah, now this is difficult for me, so maybe somebody can help me. The measures they used were semantic distance. So they effectively gave people pairs of words, and then another pairs of words, they put them along grids, and they said they had to match up these words, these pairs, and then the further away the likelihood of them being matched but still really connected, that's semantic distance. And if you have your brain stimulated for 20 minutes with this very small current, then the semantic distance goes up, and that's taken as you've increased your creativity. And the other measure was, what did they do? They gave you a noun, and then you had to come up with a verb related to it. And then I guess there's an acceptable list and an unacceptable list. And it's a similar thing of semantic distance. The further away you get, but still acceptable, the more creative you've become. And the TDCS, the stimulation part, can increase your creativity, or at least increase the semantic distance between those. Curiously though, you can also increase it by just saying to the person, be creative. Yeah, and that's what the cued line indicates. But TDCS makes our creativity, at least by this measure, even better. So maybe we should have all stuck a bit of electrodes on before we started today.
Do you want to say anything else? I think that brings us to the conclusion where we got to, but just to wrap it up.
So I think we've gone from a handbag to a fairly sophisticated scientific experiment, and there are a number of issues that have been raised and a number of discussion points. And I think finishing on this as you might expect from a table which has a couple of top scientists sitting at it, that we've ended up with a fairly sort of scientific responses, but the sort of I'm just thinking about this. One of the worries is that in trying to understand these phenomena, which scientists try and do, are we walking into a situation whereby we see creativity as something that we can quantify, that we can put numbers on, that we can write equations on? And I find that as a scientist a frightening concept. I prefer to in many ways to although clearly the reductionist understanding of life, going back to an earlier talk, is what we try to do. I think there are dangers in getting into that, and I think it's important that we have an ability to respect and understand these concepts outside scientific quantification.
Fantastic. That's us.